What's up, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of We Got Issues. We are in the presence of greatness here, guys. But before I introduce him, but I know you guys can see him already. But before I introduce him, let me say a couple of some of his accolades in here. You know him as a creator and co-creator of Marvel characters like Shang-Chi, Nebula, Gamora, Drax the Destroyer, and of course Thanos. He revamped characters like Captain Marvel, Adam Warlock. He also spearheaded many deaths, including Jason Todd, Captain Marvel, and the New Gods. And he has won so many awards. So I'm just going to highlight a few of them. Since 1973, he's won various awards. Outstanding New Talent in 1973 for Shazam Awards, Inkpot Award in 1975, the Eagle Awards, I believe that was in England, for favorite comic book artist in 1977, and then Best Long Story Baxter Award for Dreadstar in 1986, and in 2017 he was inducted to the Eisner Award Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, again, we are in the presence of greatness here, Mr. Jim Starlin. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing fine. It's a nice rainy day here. I'm getting a lot of backgrounds done on the job I'm working on.
Where are you located, by the way, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm in upstate New York.
Upstate New York. Okay. Oh yeah, it is raining there. I'm in California, so we had our rain already.
Oh,
We
you've had
had
a big rain.
we had a big rain. Yeah. I actually was I lived in Florida in Miami for 4 years. So when the rain came here and everybody was kind of just panicking a little bit, we were just like, what are we having for dinner today? Because it was like one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's a tropical storm and it was fine and all, but yeah, no, it's great that thank you very much for taking the time, sir. Again, if I seem some sort I sound kind of nervous because you have achieved so much in your career there. I mean, the creator of everything. Technically you are the one above all, so to speak, for
Well,
for
I
all
think
these
Jack
characters.
Kirby and Steve Ditko had a little bit to do with that on the Marvel side.
I think you kind of like peppered in a little bit more in there too as well.
Next
Well,
generation.
yeah, I want to get started by asking you a personal question. Um, where did the idea of Thanos came from? Because that has always I used to have an LCS and I since sold it, and the always debate has been that Jim Starlin saw Dark Side and he said that's a great idea. I want to do something similar to that. Is that true at all? Can you debunk that at this point in time?
Okay, two-part answer. First part, the idea of Thanos came out of a psychology class in junior college I was going to after the service.
Hmm.
We had a guest lecturer coming in speaking about the Freudian concepts of Thanos and Eros, the darker and lighter side.
Hmm.
Um, the visuals of it did come from the New Gods, but
Right.
not the dark side. If you take a good look at Thanos, you realize that I sort of sprang his outfit off from Metron.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and as it happens, both Thanos and Darkseid back in '72 were bulky characters, but not really big characters.
Right.
And just through synchronicity over the years, they both ballooned up to the size of Buicks. And so the fact that they look like each other has
Right.
more to do with their height than anything else. But no, it was never Dark Side. It was Mentor. What can I
Right.
tell you?
Would that be something that you'd be interested in doing if there was ever a crossover between two? I mean, you gotta have if there was news about it, you gotta be the one who says, I wanna spearhead this. I'm the only one qualified for it. It's either me or Jack Kirby, right? Kind of thing.
Well, Jackie had to do spiritual workings on that one. But no, I wouldn't be interested. I don't want to work for either Marvel or DC anymore. I'm
Mhm.
working on Dreadstar with Jamie Jameson, and we're having a great time working on that. And I have no desire to do anything else.
Right. Now let me ask you a couple of things about your somewhat origin story. I read that
Bit by
you
a spider.
were
Yeah.
you were bit by the spider and then just writing started happening. You were part of you were in Vietnam, is that correct?
I was in the service
You were in the
over in
service.
Southeast Asia. Yes.
And then during your downtime, you were just kind of just doodling kind of stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah, I worked in a photo lab, so they had out of date paper, which was 11 by 17, perfect size for drawing comic books. So I flip it
Hmm.
over off the emulsion side, and
Hmm.
I would draw Hulk stories. I would send to Marvel, and they say very nice, but except one
Hmm.
time, finally, when Herb Trimpe sent me a letter back saying he really
Right.
liked it, so that kept me going.
Was that something that's I guess your fellow soldiers were kind of making fun of you of when you were kind of just drawing on the side?
Oh, at first, when I was in the States and boot camp and stuff like that, I always hit it because there was a couple of times where they saw me drawing it and the guy's going, "Oh, you gay or
Mhm.
something?" And, I said, "No, I like drawing comic books." So
Right.
I kept it under wraps for a long time. But by the time I got to the end of my term in
Right.
service,
Right.
I was living in a barracks where we the lights were off all the time. And
Right.
so they gave everybody a little box that you could build out of plywood.
Right.
And I put a drawing board in there, and anybody who was awake saw me drawing away when they came in.
Right.
So I said, let them think what they think.
How difficult was that for you, for someone who's very interested on these characters and drawing and literally making it a career out of it, where it's one of those it's during that time where it's seen as, well, I guess it's till this day sometimes it's seen as something for kids. Did that Was that very difficult to kind of break out of?
Yeah, in the 70s, it was sort of looked down upon. I remember being hassled in a subway in New York City because I was reading the
Right.
comic.
Right.
Um, you know, but I figured early on that I was going to be what I was going to be, and so
Hmm.
other folks didn't like it. They just didn't like it, So there's nothing I could do about that.
Right. Take me to your very first interview when you were handing in your stuff in there. What did they? What was some of the stuff that's going through your head and kind of criticism that you've gotten from editors when you were handing over some of your stuff there, just to get your feet wet in the industry?
Well, the first job I got through the mail through Joe Orlando. I sent him in a couple of two-page horror stories, which he
Hmm.
bought. Didn't meet him until years later.
Hmm.
I guess my first interview was with Frank Giacoya up at Marvel. He was sort of the Marvel didn't have an art director at
Right.
that point.
Right.
Um, and basically, Frank was worked as an inker in the office, and so did de facto art directing
Hmm.
stuff. And I came in there, and I wasn't good enough to draw comics books at that point, but I had a little bit of talent, and so they made me the new de facto art director up there.
Oh,
And
really?
my first job was designing covers that other pencilers would finish off, like John Buscema, Gil
Right.
Kane. I'd
Right.
get up to the office in the morning and I would pick out a pile of Xeroxes of what was going on inside the book, and I would figure out what I would that should be on the
Right.
cover. And then Stan would come in at noon, and it was always the same story. He'd
Hmm.
look him over and go, "Terrific, terrific, what, what?" And then he would take his glasses off, and I've told this story before. Forgive me if anyone's heard it before, but Stan would
Hmm.
put his glasses on the chair behind him, and then crawl up on the desk and
Hmm.
act out how he wanted the Silver Surfer or whoever it was to be posed on the cover.
He was
And
posing
I'd
for you.
make a mental note. So Stan wanted to be an actor when he was a kid.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah,
So was he like posing for everybody? He's like, oh, this is what it's gonna look like.
yeah. Apparently, he did this with everybody. I talked to Jim Shooter about it. And he said he had to stand up on the desk a lot. But the funnest part about it was that Stan, about every fifth, sixth, seventh time, would forget he put his glasses on the chair and he would sit down on them and break them.
He'll go through glasses. I'm
Oh,
surprised
he
he
did.
doesn't
And
have.
he would reach over to the intercom and hit, "Holly, I did it again." And she would come in with a brand new pair of glasses, take the remnants out, probably down to
Yeah,
an optometrist to fix. So,
and he
it
had no
was
sponsorship from lens crafters or anything like
I
that.
hope he has stock in it. I'm not even sure if Lens Crafter was around back in the 70s.
Right. Was it during that time was it hard being in the industry during that time? Because not a lot of people always praise the golden age and sorry, the silver age and the bronze age of comics, and they always see the good parts that came out of it, all these characters, all these stories, but I never really heard anyone just like yourself talk about the industry itself, the business itself. Was it difficult trying to get people to buy comics during that time? Because now it's like, yeah, just buy it off. But like in the 70s, where it's seen kind of, I wouldn't say taboo, but kind of looked down on. Was it really hard for you guys to go every day and be like, what are we gonna do to get these people to buy these things?
I think there was something that the generation before me more or less had. By the time I got into the business, colleges were finding comic books. Stan had broken into the college market.
Hmm.
Marvel sales were doing well. Uh, they kept putting me on books that weren't selling, so
Right,
that was
right,
kind of strange because I was just starting off. Whoever
right.
gets started off, so that's how I ended up on Captain Marvel because
Hmm.
Roy said, "Well, this book is probably going to get canceled before you finish the first issue, but start in on it anyhow. We'll pay you."
Yeah.
And as it happened, the sales went up when I started working on it. And after that, it was a lot easier going because Roy got confidence in me and he just said, well, Starlin's going to do what Starlin's going to do. So just let him go at it. Yeah.
You kind of like you're kind of like the Dwayne Johnson of the 70s in comic books. If they want something revamped, they just call you up then, right?
Is that because of this?
Well, no, because he revamps a lot of franchises and they just kind of just take off right away, kind of thing. So, like Captain Marvel is one of them. I think that you know a lot of people kind of associate with your Thanos, but someone like myself, that has connected with Captain Marvel, especially the death of Captain Marvel. I mean, I see you more of a Captain Marvel. You would relate more to Captain Marvel than Thanos. Is that correct?
No, no, I definitely relate more to Thanos. I've got a
Oh,
dark side.
really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I revel in it sometimes.
But
Look
the
at my lighting.
I know, right? But the way that you wrote Captain Marvel, the death of Captain Marvel, I mean, I would have thought different because I mean, for someone like myself who connected to that story a lot, I mean, I would say in the recent years because during the pandemic, my father passed away, and reading that book just, it hits differently. How did you come about on killing someone that way? Like it's not a conventional blow things up or being stabbed or anything like that. It was one of those emotionally driven deaths. Like how did
Well,
you come
my
to that?
first 4 or 5 drafts on the plot were those blow 'em up, dying heroics, and I hated them. Jim Shooter had approached me to do this because they didn't know what to do with Captain Marvel.
Hmm.
The sales were down. They wanted to turn him into a her.
Hmm.
And so they approached me, and I worked out a deal with them where I did their first graphic novel over there, as
Hmm.
long with the agreement that the third one would be Dreadstar. So
Right.
my own father had passed away of cancer a year ago beforehand or something like that, and eventually
Hmm.
the thought hit me that that's the way to go. And
Right.
the funny thing was, from what I understand, is I sent the plot in, and they had a lot of new assistant editors up there, and they all read it and they hated it. And if
Right.
it hadn't been for Jim Shooter, that would have never gotten done. He looked at it and said, "No, let's go with this." And
Right.
yeah,
Because
so
that wasn't the way most heroes would go out during that time, right?
no, well, there hadn't been that many heroes that had gone out. The Doom Patrol had gone off in some explosion a couple of years before, and there
Hmm.
were a couple other ones, but like you said, they all died of heroic deaths, and anything I came up with along those lines had been done before, and I
Yeah.
just didn't want to do the same story again.
Right, because I was talking to Jason Aaron's yesterday. Well, I mean, like a lot of people don't haven't seen that episode yet, or have seen that episode, but he did mention on our interview too as well that yeah, when it came to Jane Foster, Mighty Thor, and pretty much killing her off, yeah, he did mention your name and he wanted to do a throwback to that kind of time too as well. where she kind of died with cancer too as well, right? Why do you believe that that's not the case nowadays when they're killing off characters? Now when they're killing off characters, it's just a lot of blowing up, not emotionally driven. Where, in my opinion, it's a lot better to actually do that.
Well, I'm not following the comics all that closely these days, but
Mhm.
when I last did, they were killing them off, and then the next month, those characters would come back.
Right,
So
right.
death has sort of lost its sting in the comic books in some ways. It doesn't have any reality. It doesn't have any permanence.
Right. No, well, let me ask you this actually. This is a personal question of mine too as well. And you're the right person to ask this. During the death of Superman, with someone who is famously killing off some characters there too as well. Would have you gone that way and literally kill off Superman that way and then bring him back, or would you leave him just be and then probably bring him back like 20 years later?
Oh, well, Superman was, I mean, Superman is Superman. He is the flagship
Yeah,
of DC Comics, him and Batman.
yeah,
So it was once again a case of that you knew he wasn't going to stay dead.
right,
Just corporate reality is such that when we killed off Robin, they didn't tell the licensing department, and they freaked out like crazy about how many lunchboxes and pajamas they still had with Robin on it.
right.
So this was several years later, and they learned their lesson. So I'm sure I wasn't part of that. So, but I'm sure that from the beginning, the plan was to bring him back. You just couldn't do it otherwise. You couldn't do 20
Mhm,
years of DC Comics
mhm.
without Superman. That's be a big hole in their
Right.
ledger. They just wouldn't
Right.
have that money coming in. So the
Yeah.
reality was, it's all they are corporations, and that sort of thing. The bottom
Yeah.
line is the bottom line.
Yeah. Talking about like emotional deaths too as well. Not a lot of people see Jason Todd's death very emotional, but I thought it was a very emotional death. How did that come about? And how did that how did you guys figure that out? Like you're gonna well, you guys didn't technically decided to kill him, right? The fans did, right? So you guys had to do
I'm
like
innocent.
three
I had nothing to do with it. I just read the story.
types.
Um, Denny O'Neil approached me to do a fill-in Batman story.
Hmm.
I did it. He liked it and asked me to do another one. And after about the fourth one, I asked him if I was a regular writer on Batman, and he said, "We'll see." But he said, "We'll have to make some changes. You've been eliminating Robin from all the stories. You're not been putting him in the stories
Hmm.
because I always figured if you're fighting crime in a gray and black outfit
Hmm.
and you bring along a kid in primary colors,
Hmm.
well, that goes a little bit beyond child abuse. That's just right
Yeah.
trying to kill the kid. And how many Robins have they gone through at this point?
Right.
It's not a job that has a long life spell. You don't have a good shelf life on those things.
Right.
So I always left Robin out. And when Denny started saying you got to put him in,
Hmm.
I didn't know anything about Jason Todd, so I had to learn a
Right.
little bit. I learned that nobody liked him, and so the one first story I did with him, it's you pretty well have to assume at the end that he's murdered this guy at the end of the story,
Right.
and he used him sparingly after that. And uh, here's DC is going to hate me for telling this story again. DC decided they were going to do a AIDS book,
Hmm.
and being the soulful creatures that they are up there, they put a suggestion box in the office and said, put in which character you think should get AIDS in the DC universe.
Hmm.
And being the soulful character I immediately filled the box up with as many Robins as I could stuff in there. They recognized my handwriting, and all my Robins got tossed out, and Jimmy Olsen ended up winning the contest.
Right. Right.
So they were going to give Jimmy Olsen AIDS. And
Hmm.
then they found out that the actor who played Jimmy Olsen in the Christopher Reeves
Hmm.
Superman movies was gay.
All
And
right.
that freaked
That's
them
right.
all out. And that whole
Right.
project just got dumped at that point.
Oh
But
wow.
I had made it clear by then to everybody that I thought Robin was a bad idea.
You were an advocate for Robin just
Right. And then
being
he came
gone.
up with this idea of the phone write-in, and he approached me to kill off Robin.
Hmm.
And so I did up the story, and we had a two-page alternate ending all set up, which I guess they used Jim Apato's art for that later on down the line in the Red Hood's origin story. But my
Hmm.
script for it was lost for the longest time.
Right.
And as it happens, doing that story was a big mistake professionally for me. Like I mentioned, the licensing department got all upset about us killing off Robin without letting them know.
Hmm.
And so somebody had to pay for this. And as it went down the line, guess who ended up getting blamed? And so within a couple of months, everything that I had up at DC evaporated.
Right.
Uh, New Gods I was off of, Gilgamesh, what I was doing, they suddenly put it on a thing. Batman had to be, I had to get off Batman.
Hmm.
And basically all my work dried up. But fortunately, I went over to Marvel and started doing the Silver Surfer, which led to the Infinity Gauntlet. So it worked out okay.
It worked out. Yeah, everything
Yeah.
worked out fine.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays with all the MCUs and the movies and all that stuff, how proud are you to see your cosmic characters being loved by a lot of people and being celebrated nowadays? Where I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the '90s, there wasn't that much interest in the cosmic characters. It's more of like just down to earth, brutally, just a lot of bloodshed. Nowadays, cosmic characters are well celebrated, not just in movies, but also in comic books nowadays with Silver Surfer and Cosmic Ghost Rider and all that stuff. How proud are you to actually see all your characters stand the test of time?
It was good. Proud. I guess there is some pride there. It's mostly surreal.
Hmm.
Um, Shortly after the Infinity War came out, I went off to a convention and then came home that night and I said, well, that's my 15 minutes of Handy War Hall of Fame. Uh, and After I settled down for the night, I put on this late show with Stephen Colbert that I had recorded. And he made a Thanos joke.
Right.
And I went, oh my goodness, this may last longer than 15 minutes. And a decade later, I'm still kind of surprised every time somebody like Pip the Troll shows up at the end. Pip and Eros show up at the end of
Right.
the Eternals.
Right. Were you ever involved in the I wouldn't say writing process, but in the consulting process ever since Iron Man, the first Iron Man came out? Because essentially that's where it's going to lead to is the Infinity War. Um, were you ever consulted from Iron Man, or were you just consulted um, during Avengers?
I was never really consulted. I mean, most of the writing, and I think this is a good idea. Is the work itself is what
Hmm.
is is the legacy, I guess you'd say.
Right.
Um, Marvel and DC have always had sort of a Chinese wall between the companies, the movie companies and the comics. And
Right.
uh, a lot of times during that period, I wasn't on good terms with the particular publisher. In fact,
Hmm.
when the Russos brothers wanted to get me for a cameo for Endgame, they called up Marvel editorial, and Marvel told them that they had no contact info for me,
Oh wow.
even though they were sending me out a check every so often for reprints and that. They had no
Yeah.
contact.
Isn't there like residual checks coming in?
Yeah, so eventually a producer found me on Facebook, and I ended up getting onto it. But
Hmm.
yeah, and that was kind of nice because that was basically my one actual foray into the universe of the cinema out there.
Yeah.
Um, because I was on bad terms with Marvel, I figured I was just going to be there sitting in the background somewhere where something else was going on and
Yeah.
be a day of just sitting around being bored. But
Yeah.
the first thing they did when I got on the set was had me sign a non-disclosure form,
Of course.
which everybody does.
Mhm.
And the two writers, Steve and Chris, and the Russos,
Hmm.
Only Joe was there that day. His brother had pneumonia and wasn't on the set. They all wanted to talk to somebody. It had been 3 years not being able to talk to anybody about this. So
Right.
uh, Steve and Chris immediately hauled me off into a trailer and started telling me everything. And
Hmm.
later on, they took me over to the Marvel offices on the Marvel Studios, and down the hallway they had all the concept paintings lined up for both the Endgame and the Infinity War, and they just ran me through the entire story,
Oh
which
wow.
was really kind of cool. But then I found that I had to keep my mouth shut for the next year and a half,
Of course.
and that wasn't easy, you know, because everybody online kept on saying, "Well, this is what's going to happen." I'd read it and I go, "No, but I can't tell you."
It's
You're
like
wrong.
I'm no way involved in
Yeah,
it.
just keep
Oh,
my mouth shut.
I'm not gonna lie. Based on what you just told me, I mean, like it's kind of heartbreaking that you weren't there to consult at all because, I mean, Kevin Feige could have just called you up or could have looked you up at the time, and consulted with you. But now it makes sense because I saw an interview with James Gunn the other day promoting Guardians of the Galaxy, and they were talking about how the Infinity Stones were made, and he's like, I wrote that in 60 minutes. I was like, why would you write that in 60 minutes? There's like content there. You could have called Jim Starlin, but now you're telling me this. Now it kind of makes sense why he just wrote that in 60 minutes because they couldn't get a hold of you or get a contact with you. So that's kind of a little bit heartbreaking that you weren't there for consulting on Infinity War. I mean, essentially what built the whole MCU universe, right?
Yeah, but they stayed to the heart of the story, as if not to the letter of it. I mean,
Hmm.
there's when I was sitting there through watching Infinity War, I was going, "Oh, that's their scene. That's my scene. That's their scene. That's my scene."
Yeah.
So and the studios themselves have always treated me very nicely. I mean,
Hmm.
they've been generous with me. They invite me to all the premieres. I've had some really nice conversations with Kevin Feige, and it's just
Hmm.
I have no complaints with them.
Yeah. Talk about the a little bit about the business of the comic book industry there. There's the business part of it, and then there's the emotional part of the comic book industry. You give your time and you give your career to certain publishers, but then they never really give you like a proper send off. Is that something that was a little bit shocking to you when you got into the industry and just found out like, hey, this is the way I go, I guess, and that's it? Like, just
Well,
you
when I
give me a
started
pen
off,
and
I
that's
was
about it.
21. When I started off, I was 21, and I just wanted to draw comics, and so the paltry page rate that I was getting at the time didn't bother me. I could work fast, and I was young.
Hmm.
Um, as it went along, it's like Marvel in particular always put the creative team down at the bottom of the ladder.
Hmm.
When they ran into problems financially, they just stopped paying the artists and writers.
Hmm.
Uh, I remember one time it got so bad I survived a week on mustard sandwiches.
Oh
You know,
wow.
yeah, I mean and being the typical freelancer didn't have any savings, so when the paycheck
Right.
stopped coming in,
Right.
uh, you know, uh, but you learn as you go, and things have changed. Now we have a whole different system
Hmm.
where you don't need to be part of Marvel or DC.
Right.
Some people have gotten very successful just doing Kickstarters. That's the way I'm going with Dreadstar.
Right.
Uh, we do a Kickstarter every time. We get the money up for the printing and
Hmm.
get it. We're still having a little trouble getting to the comic book shops, but that's going to get worked out with
Right.
Monkey Wrench Press now. It's the one who I'm working with on Dreadstar.
Right.
So and Dark Horse, we're working on a thing on that.
Now,
So and I still work a little bit for some of the companies. Like I'm working for Dark Horse on a series called Order and Outrage,
hmm
with Greg Morales is drawing,
hmm
which I'm quite proud of. Um,
he's amazing.
yeah, I mean, it's his best work. I mean, he just turns in these pages, and I go, oh my god.
Right.
I'm learning to hate him. He draws so well.
Right. Before we speak on the Dreadstar, because I'm very interested in Dreadstar. How I want to ask you, how important is it for someone like yourself who create all these characters and all these memorable characters? How important is it to keep the intellectual property of these characters and say, this is mine? Nobody takes it. If you want it, you have to go through legal stuff with it.
It's essential. I mean, we're supposed to be adults. I know we're cartoonists, but we're supposed to be adults, and we're all going to get old.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all going to eventually get our last job. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's this industry is littered with horror stories like Siegel and Schuster and Reed Crandall, practically blind, a great artist, working as a
Mm-hmm.
night watchman over in Brooklyn. I mean, all
Right.
sorts of stories like that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to do this, you ought to be smart enough to get in there and make sure that you have a backup, that you're not
Mm-hmm.
going to be working as a night watchman in Brooklyn.
Right. I always ask the artists and writers this when I encounter them. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer being a artist writer for hire, or do you prefer having that safety net of a contract with a publisher? Which one do you prefer that?
I usually only do contracts with any kind of publisher at this point.
Mhm.
You know, and you may love your editor right now at any company, but he's not going to be there forever.
Right.
And been in this business long enough to know that the replacement editor may turn out to be a shit. And
Hmm.
you don't want to have to deal with them, and you're at the mercy of whatever. And especially during the '90s when the corporations were really taking over the companies, and they basically were hiring editors for $10,000 a year, which is nothing. And
Hmm.
so to compensate, they gave them complete control. And some of these editors were. I had one editor who was a real monster who didn't know the difference between a caption and a panel.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, he kept saying I was putting too many captions in, and I was going, but I'm not writing this story. I'm just drawing it. How can I be putting too many captions in? And then I've figured out that he was talking about panels eventually.
How did you become an editor?
Good question. One of those
uh,
mysteries of the universe.
collectors like myself, young collectors like myself, we were led to believe that, yourself, John Romita, Jack Kirby always fought for the rights of owning your own characters and being independent. Has that always been something in your mind that you want to be independent and do your own stuff like Dreadstar and all that stuff there?
Yeah, it took me a while to catch on. I mean, I did Warlock and Captain Marvel before I got around to Dreadstar.
Hmm.
And the economics of it back when I started off at it were difficult. It's much easier to do it now. Of course, now I'm more comfortable on a lot of different fronts, so that's it. But basically, back in the old days, you had to depend on a company like Eclipse or Pacific Comics, neither of which is around anymore because
Hmm.
the market just didn't have it. They didn't have the independent distribution into drugstores and stuff like that that the comic book shops had. They could get into the comic book shops,
Hmm.
but a lot of times they just couldn't survive, and if you
Right.
they couldn't survive. That's why Dreadstar has been at, I think it's 6 different publishers at this point. They
Yeah.
kept dying on me. You know.
I mean, that's actually what my would leads me to my next question with Dreadstar. Upon looking at Dreadstar, yeah, you're right. 5, 6 publishers. Is that something that's just luck of the draw kind of thing, where it's just like, yeah, all of a sudden the publishers just kind of either get sold or just go out of business kind of thing? Like, why is Dreadstar that character that I know would succeed in like Marvel or DC or even Image Comics? Why is it going through different publishers?
Well, it started off at Marvel. excuse me, through Epic Illustrator through the great Archie Goodwin as the editor. Um, but I owned the rights to it, so I thought I'd take it around and eclipses Jan and Dean Mulaney, editors there, did the price. That was the Syzygy origin story. And then I went back to Marvel to Bizarre Adventures, which Denny O'Neil was editing. It was a black and white book, which led to the graphic novel came first, and
The
then the
graphic
black
novel, yeah.
and white, the graphic novel, which Shooter arranged, and then that, and then Archie started Epic Illustrated Epic Comics, and
Right.
so it stayed at Marvel there for a while until somehow or another I got in bad straits with somebody up at bookkeeping up at Marvel, and my paychecks just started disappearing. They would be printed off, and they never made it to the mailroom. They just disappeared.
Really? It's
Yeah,
just
and
out of thin air.
Jim Shooter was trying to fix that, and he said he made sure the things were printed, but they never got to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when we went over to First, broke the contract with Marvel, and went over to First and did that. But I've been doing Dreadstar for 10 years at that point, so I gave it over
Mm-hmm.
to Peter David and Angel Medina. And they
Mm-hmm.
did it for another 20 issues, and then First Comics disappeared. Um, Later on, Dreadstar's daughter made a brief foray into the universe at Malibu Comics,
Right.
um, which we are going to be reprinting that, run by Peter David and Ernie Colon, as a companion piece for the third Dreadstar graphic novel, which would be Dreadstar versus Dreadstar, it's called.
Right. Well, isn't the Dreadstar during that time was a female Dreadstar, right?
Exactly. Supposedly
Oh,
his
that's
daughter.
why it's. Oh, okay, okay, I get it
Yeah, now it's
now.
Dreadstar versus Dreadstar. And basically, we're using Peter and Ernie's version as the Lord Papal's propaganda story.
Mm-hmm.
And what Jamie and I are doing as the real story as he
Mm-hmm.
relates it to Willow years later.
Right, right. And now you are doing a Kickstarter for Dreadstar now, so you are actually in control of everything now of Dreadstar.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm working with Monkey Wrench Press, and
Mm-hmm.
they actually do the Kickstarter stuff and the printing and things
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Right.
But I've got control over how everything looks.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, the editor publisher, sends me Chris and Phil, who is the tech guy, and they send me
Right.
things regularly, and I have to approve them.
Right.
So I'm a much happier camper these days.
Yeah. What
The
what what
control
can you
freak in me is satisfied.
what can you tell me about Dreadstar, and how did Dreadstar stand the test of time in here? Because Dreadstar has been around for a while now. How is Dreadstar fitting in today's comic book industry, in today's world?
um, it started off as a fairy tale, believe it or not, and he wasn't
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be the main character in the
Mm-hmm.
Metamorphosis Odyssey. There was a character named Ankadon, an Egyptian type alien, and Dressler didn't get introduced until about the fifth episode of that story.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, I found him much more interesting,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of changed the ending around so he survived and Ankadon didn't at the end, and decided I was just going to go with him. I found him much more an interesting character.
Right.
I like characters with conflicting motivations, and
Right.
he's just a mess.
Right. And I think I think there is a studio that agreed with you too as well back in 2015 or 2016, but something went wrong or something happened during the pre-production of Dreadstar, because it was supposed to make a leap into either a movie or TV, right?
We had a deal with Universal for on the Science Fiction Channel, and we were going to develop Dreadstar for a TV series. And unfortunately, the producer on it died.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so that sort of killed it. And I think in some ways that's been holding us back in the meantime. And now we got this strike going on, so who knows? had a
Yeah.
couple of leads. I've been out in LA quite a bit trying
Right.
to generate some interest in it. I'd like to do a streaming series. I have no interest in doing a movie.
Right.
The story's just too big for that. But the way the streaming services are these days, I'd love to
Right.
get some interested in that.
Yeah, I think that'd be. I think Dreadstar in a streaming service would be really well. Will be really well received. In my opinion, I would go to Amazon Prime. That's just me, because that's a lot of customers there. But as of right now, I believe the are you still continuing with Dreadstar right now? Because from what I read, they went in publication in 2021. Is that correct?
Yes, we did the first graphic novel through Ominous Press,
Hmm.
which was another. Oh, I forgot to put them on the list.
Hmm.
They're the latest one to die on us. Yeah, they sort of went down the tubes after the Dreadstar Return graphic novel, and the
Hmm.
best people from that company have gone over and started Monkey Wrench, and I've gone with them.
Hmm.
And so far, uh, the second graphic novel, Dreadstar versus the Inevitable, which is sort of our pandemic story, it was done during the pandemic,
Right.
um, is at the printer and will be out shortly. And those
Right.
who have done their were part of the Kickstarter are going to be getting their books finally. We got messed up on the lettering on this thing, and
Hmm.
it's late because of that.
Right.
Um, but I have finished the pencils for Dreadstar versus Dreadstar, and Jamie
Hmm.
Jameson is inking them now, and I'm coloring
Hmm.
as they come in. And as of today, I'm 32 pages into the fourth book of the pencils, which is a
Right.
book called Where's Dreadstar?
Right.
Something happened. So
Oh,
we named
nice.
it Where's Dreadstar?
You mentioned that you mentioned Dark Horse. Have you thought about taking Dreadstar and putting it to a major publication at some point in time, like Dark Horse or Image or IDW?
I can't talk about that right at the moment.
Of course, no problem.
Yeah, no, we got a distribution deal going and talking to somebody about it, and yeah, that's we
Well,
want to get
that's
into comic book shops, and that's the way to go do it, the best way.
either way, that sounds exciting though. Now that you have a very storied career, a career that every artist and writers would envy. What's next
Not if they
for
knew the
Jim?
details.
I mean, what's next for Jim Starlin? What's in the future? Besides Dreadstar that we just talked about, but like, well, where do you see yourself now in the next 10, 20 years?
Well, I plan on doing five of the graphic novels of Dreadstar,
Hmm.
and continue writing uh, Order and Outrage with Rags as long as he'll stay with it.
Hmm.
Basically, I never know what happens to what's the future. I'm not a real big planner on years ahead.
Right.
I don't know what it is. I'm getting on in years, so
Right.
there's limited space there, and I don't think they're going to be hauling me in to do any stunt work up there at the Marvel Universe at this point. So I was just going to keep drawing and writing things. It's not the kind of job I feel I have to retire. As long as I can
Mhm.
keep doing it,
Right.
I'm going to keep working at this drawing board. I'm very comfortable here.
That's good to hear. Well, before we end everything here, sir, it's been a great pleasure speaking with you again. Not often that someone like in my stature could actually talk to a legendary artist and writer too as well. I mean, it's just great having you here. Anything else that we could expect from you and Dreadstar in the near future, like in the next couple of years or a year or so?
Doing some experimenting with these AIs, not for the drawing of the figures or anything like that, but some of these AI programs I'm using for backgrounds. I'm doing some experimenting with some of the panels on bringing
Hmm.
using that stuff judiciously. I still want to be able to keep it as what it is, but I've been doing things like that with the Dreadstar already. With just the computer uh, opened up so many different channels,
Yeah.
so that uh, the figures in my foreground may be pencil and ink, but the background is something created through Photoshop or
Yeah.
another program.
Well,
Yeah.
it definitely helps someone just like yourself that you had an incident a couple of years ago. That definitely helps out a little bit because now you don't have to focus on the background kind of stuff. You can just focus on the main character and do this, right? So that
Yeah,
takes
and
that.
I'm not as worried about the AIs as a lot of people are, because I've been playing with this Wonder AI program, and it's the most unimaginative thing you've ever seen. I mean, you have
Yeah,
to really give it precise
specific. Yeah,
directions of what you want, and even then, it goes for the most unimaginative way of doing it it can possibly
yeah,
do it.
yeah.
I'm not worried about that too much at this point.
Exactly. No, again, thank you again for being here. Again, it's an honor and a pleasure to having you in the show. If you guys want to check out Mr. Jim Starlin, you know for a fact that he's on Instagram too as well, and Facebook. And do you have your website too as well, and Dreadstar website?
No, no, just Instagram and Facebook, which I have to admit I kind of ignore most of the time.
Where can they check out Dreadstar at this point?
Um, there'll be a collected version of the first volume of Order and Outrage coming out from Dark Horse soon. The
Hmm.
pamphlet-sized comic books are probably available inside the comic book shop still, if you got one that's got back issues.
Right.
Um, I'm really proud of that job. I hope a lot of folks get a chance. I haven't had that many of them come up to conventions to sign so
Right.
far.
Right.
So
So there you go, guys. Definitely check out Dreadstar there. Dreadstar there through again. And again, special thanks to Mr. Jim Starlin and everyone on our Patreon. If you guys want to check out our Patreon, it's patreon.com/uncensored nerds. And again, thank you very much for being here, sir. This is one of the most highlight of my podcasting career. This is amazing. Again, if you
sorry you
guys
haven't had a better life.
no, it's just that legendary artists and writers, it just doesn't come too often. Again, thank you for being here, guys. If you guys have any questions, definitely let me know. Until then, I will see you guys next time. I'll see you later.